Belder and Nestha practically fought with the Kerbal girls to open the library doors. While it seemed unreal, Liam gamely followed inside after Aku and Ralar before watching the girls jockey through the doors to follow. Just having doors held for him was something new and different, but the experience of 5 Shorvanti women showing off for 3 guys just plain felt strange. Even Scifi was in on it, maneuvering in between Nestha, Belder and the twins like a shark. It probably wasn't as bad for the shill as it seemed, and she being perfectly polite, but damn, the girl made him feel short. Nothing seemed normal. So, you guys really never went on a double date? Liam leaned over to ask Aku and Ralar as the women jockeyed through the doors. I mean, this is a sort of a triple, but kind of the same thing? Oh, goddess, no. I've never been out with this many men outside a family gathering. I mean, I've been out in public, but you date in packs? That did not come out right. Ralar looked up, almost fearfully, and Liam nearly laughed. Ralar had stopped staring up at him warily when he thought no one would notice, and at least he started talking on the walk over. I mean, more than one guy out with lots of women? All together on a date? Is that safe? Liam glanced over as Scifi got tangled in between Mara and Lynn, then looked to Aku for help. Clad in his white robe, the other shield team looked perfectly at ease, merely shrugging when he caught Liam's eye. Don't look at me. I'm out in public all the time, but I usually have a bodyguard. She's probably lurking around the theatre right now, having conniptions. Damn, Liam whispered. It's pretty normal where I'm from, at least it used to be, when the guys and girls know each other pretty well. The twins closed ranks around Aku, hemming him in like a pair of guard dogs, but the little singer seemed to be taking it all in stride. Nestha moved over to Ralar while Belder stepped in possessively, and he fought off the urge to shoot her a questioning glance. Belle always seemed like she was proud to be with him, but this just felt different. Everyone had chatted easily on the walk over, but he'd seen Belle giving Scifi the eye. It wasn't hard to see why. The woman was perfect even for a Shorvanti, and while the sisters had looked smug enough, it felt like Belle and Nestha were staking their claims. Even without a need to store vast quantities of paper books, the hall was cavernous. Study tables, conference rooms, and enclosures where students could gather filled the space, leading off in all directions. Silent, but for the dull susurrus of circulating air and the girls sorting themselves, the library had the oppressive gloom of disuse, passively waiting for students to restore it to life. The group looked at each other for the first time since meeting up. It might have been his imagination, but it felt like Belder's grip in his hand got tighter. Damn, this sure turned awkward fast. So, where's the human collection? I've been dying to take it in ever since you mentioned it, Aku asked smoothly, hugging one of the twins' arms as he looked coyly up at her sister. Liam breathed a silent sigh of relief. If Belder had held on any tighter, she might have broken his hand, but whatever was going on, Aku's question seemed to galvanize the girls into action. He'd known men could wrap a shield woman around their finger, but damn, the guy made it look easy. Alright, Aku and Ralar were dolled up so much he actually felt scruffy, but actually seeing shield guys in action was weird. Just up the main stairs, here. The sister on Aku's left nodded towards the staircase, off the main doors, as her sister carried on. It's the third gallery down. It's been a very popular exhibit. Do you want to come see it? Nestha asked, solicitously. Liam had seen the girl keep her distance from Ralar, but she was definitely hanging around him. Compared to what he'd come to expect from Belle, and what he'd seen with the twins, it was kind of odd. Hopefully Belle could properly explain later, He'd always thought dating a Shulvanti might just be reversing some things, but shill women in a group? This was something else. Belle probably thought this was normal. Hell, it probably is normal. This is one of your classes, and we have Liam here to explain as well. I'd like that very much. R'hllor smiled at her, and nodded gently his way, as the group made its way up the stairs. Liam, I hope you won't mind if we pester you with a few questions. Not a bit, he grinned. Aku had been asking questions about music all the way over, and was already well up the stairs, and while the Kerbal sisters kept pace behind him, his smile made him look like a kid in his first candy store. Reaching the second floor, they wandered through the labyrinth of corridors. He and Belle fell into a comfortable step behind the Kerbals. Sure, his eyes wandered, but Belle just elbowed him once, and he slipped his arm around her waist and gave her a sheepish grin. She looked back, arching an eyebrow with an indulgent smirk. With a human girl, he'd probably be paying a week for sneaking a look, but Belle's smirk only turned into a rakish wink, and it threw him for a moment. It had to be that whole thing about shill guys having more than one woman. Belda really was totally happy knowing they were together, and where she stood with him. It was weird. Okay, it was cool, but it was weird. Damn. He might have to talk to Hope after all. Picking over the idea, he nearly bumped into the twins when Aku cried out in horror. Lynn and Mara, whichever was which, had moved Aku behind them protectively. The guy had turned pale, and that was when Liam got his first look. Just inside the open doors to the gallery, a body lay sprawled on the floor. The azure pool of blood around the body and the spatter on the wall brought a lump to his throat. There was no living through something like that. Liam suddenly felt like he was in a tug-of-war as he and Belle tried to shield each other from the sight, and they looked at one another helplessly. It only gave a better view to R'hllor, who wailed and reached out to clutch Nesfa. "Shit, what do we do?" he asked. "We need to get you guys out of here," one of the Kerbal sisters whispered. The other nodded. "Then call security." The exhibition hall was only a short distance away, and there were signs of violence. Splintered wood marked the surface of the door, and the handle lay shattered, leaving it slightly ajar. In the confused silence, there came the sound of a scream. "Will you be quiet?" hissed Desi. "There could be more of them out there." "You're the one who screamed," Mel answered, as they tried turning Warwick gently. There was a pool of red slowly mixing with the blue on the floor. "I fell over a body, of course I screamed," Desi bit out in a hoarse whisper. Warwick was breathing, but there was so much blood. "Technically, you tripped over a head, then you fell on the body." Kellogg pointed over to the side of the room, looking pale, but her Omnipad was back out and she was shooting pictures. "It rolled somewhere over here, I think." "What are you doing?" Mel looked up and stared in disbelief. "Look, if we live through this, you owe me a lot of answers. But somebody's going to want a lot of proof." Lark finished panning around and shoved her Omnipad back into her pocket before stepping in behind Desi, grimacing. "He doesn't look good at all. Is he? He's breathing, but..." Desi choked. "Oh my goddess!" She had Warwick cradled in her arms, and, with Melondi's help, managed to slowly turn him over. The haft of a dagger was buried in his side, and blood had turned the deep blue jacket he was wearing into a ruddy purple. Even in the dim lights of the gallery, his white shirt was soaked as vivid scarlet seeped around the blade. "Shit! We have to get help!" Lark looked like she was going to gag, but she grimaced and exchanged a desperate look with Mel and Desi. "We can't move him like this." "She's right." Vadim knelt beside Melondi and set a hand on her shoulder. "You're supposed to keep someone down. I guess that's not a problem." She looked up as he moved in for a closer look. "We get training. In case of knife wounds in the kitchen, you know. We can't take the knife out or he'll start bleeding hard." Toward the front of the gallery, there was a groan as the battered doors moved on their hinges. The girls traded looks as Lark put a finger to her lips and slowly craned up for a look over the cabinets. Slipping from Warwick's side, Malondi reached over and picked up the alien sword that lay by his side. They weren't alone. "Shit! Don't you people watch horror movies?" Liam leaned in by the door near Belder, while the Kerbal girls kept in front of Aku. "Trust me, R'hllor, you never split the party." Nessa was trying desperately to calm the little shill, and seemed to be succeeding. He was pale as lilac. Whimpers escaped his lips every now and then, but he held tight to Nessa, and seemed to be getting hold of himself. "They're right," Aku whispered. After the initial cry of surprise, the singer had hung on to the girls. Though pale from the shock, he recovered his composure. Now, his voice somehow pierced the confusion. "Who knows who did this or where they are? We could walk right into them." "Someone screamed, and I swear it sounded like Desi," Scifi whispered. "We have to go check." The girls had gathered up front to protect their men, and Belder was pushing open the door. It groaned alarmingly. Inside, all was darkness, and Liam glanced over at Aku. "Come on, Velma. Let's go in the big spooky room. Maybe we'll get a Scooby snack." Aku blinked. "You watch Penga Mesaf and the Curious Clue Crew?" "What?" The pain was excruciating. Agony in its purest form. Whole and complete, yet only refined by the inability to draw a breath. Every wretched moment was worse. Lamanna Duvari hated to run. It didn't matter in the least, as she sped across the campus, weaving her way past startled onlookers. It was nearly a mile and a half from the amphitheatre to the library, and she made it in a little under 10 minutes. While no more imposing than most agents of the interior, and certainly less powerful than many an Imperial Marine, Lamanna had long since refused to recognize any weakness in herself, to an almost pathological degree, thereby allowing her to perform extraordinary feats of strength and endurance. She'd made it through the academy with commendations from her instructors on her savage will and discipline, and psychiatric notes in her file on her sheer, savage, bloody-minded stubbornness. When she'd eventually gotten access to her records, she'd taken immense pride in both. Just now, however. Reaching the library doors, 4 women from the ground pods were already waiting. Despite their disguises, each of the women carried several nasty surprises, including Par-Gas 14 charged Derringers. The short-barreled lasguns carried an anemic charge coil, their small size making them easy to conceal, while the tiny charge made them difficult to detect. The inevitable drawback was a limit of only 6 shots, but the coils were overclocked. Each of those shots could take out a raging Grinshaw, and the women holding them weren't only Death's Head commandos. As members of the FST, the Imperial Family Support Team, they were the ready alternative to the Golden Glaives when an invisible presence was desirable. These women didn't miss. One of the women, dressed as part of the support staff, was carrying a heavy pack. That would be the trauma kit. Around the campus, other members of the ground pods would be on the move, while 2 pods from the bunker would be armoring up and breaking out heavy weapons. If they were called out of the tunnels, the bunker pods had the firepower to engage anything or anyone the ground teams couldn't. Given the time to mobilize, the 6 pods would be capable of taking on anything, short of a full mech platoon. Right now, time was not on their side. 4 women would have to do. Failure was never an option at the best of times, and certainly not now. She managed to careen into one of the pillars just by the entrance and lean back against it, panting for breath. She could vomit later. At the moment, it was inconvenient. She thrust down the rising gorge and focused. Report. Image be damned. Right now she was doing well to remain standing, and at least she kept hold of the fucking omnipad. The perimeter is secure, ma'am. The gardener, Captain Filana from Pod 1, was already casting aside her tools and drawing her pistol. There were no civilians in sight, the crowd of parents well away down by the theatre. No sign of anyone else near. Lamarna nodded, knowing it looked like a struggle, rather than the curt gesture she preferred, and raised the omnipad to her ear. Control, reports. Lamarna tried to keep her wheezing to a minimum, to hear Captain Briona make her report. Ma'am, we've checked the external cams. As far as we can tell, there's only one perp inside. Repeat, one active shooter. We've started running recognition software. Over. One shooter. 4 deathheads. Damn it, I hate running. This will be over before I'm in any shape to help make an entry. 4 on 1. Filana, I'll coordinate a sweep. Take your team. Reach the objective. General Order 24 applies. Go! Breathing was getting easy enough to fake complete sentences, but it didn't matter. Given her order, Filana didn't need to be told twice. She and the others were already bounding through the entrance. Lamarna Duvari watched them race through the foyer toward the landing, peered out on the commons, where 2 other figures were already racing her way, nodded in satisfaction, then vomited in the shrubbery. Figures were moving into the gallery. Melondi felt her nails dig into her palm as she gripped the sword and leaned out to peer down the aisle for a better look. Scifi! Relief flooded through her. Even at a distance, there was just no mistaking the girl. Quick! We need help! Turning her back to the cabinet, she took a deep breath. They weren't out of the riptide yet, but she had to do everything she could. This wasn't their fault. The slightly sweet smell of blood was everywhere, mixing in with an odd metallic scent. Looking back down at Warwick as he lay in Desi's arms, she swallowed. The deep azure blood from the corpse was spreading across the floor, and smeared all over Desi from her fall. She'd not yet noticed, but it was mixing with the deep red of human blood on her hands. It was the same deep azure that dotted the blade. She gulped again and looked at the sword warily, as she set it carefully aside. Mel? What's going... Oh, shit! Scifi arrived and was looking down at Warwick. Nesfa and the twins were hot on her heels, along with Belder, Liam, Aku, and Relar. Scifi, you know first aid, don't you? It was a moot question. The diver had already pulled off her sweater as she moved to Desi's side. Warwick groaned as she applied pressure. This is really bad. Has anyone called for help? Scifi bet out. Melondi nodded. We were going to, but we got hung up by... Relar saw the body and screamed. That, Kellock said flatly. What in the deep? One of the Kerbal sisters moved to shield him, while the other put a protective arm about his shoulders. Who is that? Though turning nearly as white as his tunic, Aku mutely shook his head, shaken but not stirred. Liam moved past Nestha as she held Relar, following the trail to the corner of the room. I found the rest of her, he said. Anyone know who this is? You must be kidding me! Belder hauled Liam back. Are you out of your mind? Kinda grew up in a war zone, Bell. I'm putting as much pressure on as I think he can take, but he's still bleeding. Scifi's hands were covered in crimson, and she looked up desperately. He needs wound sealant. A hospital, right now. R'hllor made a gulping sound and turned puce. Melondi bit her lip. All around her was chaos. Nessa was doing her best to comfort R'hllor, while Belda looked at her boyfriend like he was... well, alright, he was an alien. Scifi was back over Warwick, doing her best, while Desi looked like she was going to cry. Lark was trembling and filming everything in sight. The twins were hanging on to Aku as if assassins were going to jump out from the shadows. At least Aku seemed to be maintaining his self-control, even if he looked like he was focusing intensely on not throwing up. Mel? Vadim laid a hand on her shoulder and looked up at her. You've got this. She looked down at him, and time froze for a moment. We don't have time for this. Melondi raised her voice, shouting at the room. I know you people are out there, and you can hear me just fine. I want you here, and I want you here right now. There was an echoing bang from the front of the gallery, as the doors flew wide. Figures pounded toward them. Imperial Guard, show us your hands. You can just do that? Vadim whispered. Goddess, dating you is going to be rough. Lamanna had sent the others in as they arrived. Reports were coming back as the team swept the library. The building had been turned into an abattoir with 3 dead. A shooting. In a school. It was unthinkable. What kind of monster would do that to children? Even in the interior there were limits. Philana had reported back. At least the objective was alive, and was apparently demanding a medevac. One had already been inbound since the alarm went up, and she looked up to see the shuttle spiraling in, the shrill whine of its braking thrusters, sending alarmed Patazi fluttering from the trees as it settled down on the green. There were civilians inside. All of them would have to be taken under General Order 24. There could be no exceptions. The day couldn't possibly get worse. Still, the objective was alive. All things were possible. Her omnipad pinged. It was Control, and she thumbed open the call. This is Davari. What is it, Control? Ma'am, we just got confirmation on the shooter from facial recognition. Captain Veldy valued her time leading Pod 3. Being selected for the family support team, serving the Imperial family itself, had been a singular honor. It had gotten her out of the trenches faced every rotation by the Empire's finest. Away from the blood and gore up to her armpits every deployment. The mindless tedium broken by minutes of excitement, terror and vomit. Going undercover as a janitor for a bunch of college girls wasn't all that different. Across the room, Sergeant Leanta was picking up the rest of her medkit and trying to console 2 of the students. One of the girls was tall enough to be a poster child from the Marines, but right now both looked like they were ready to break. Veldy couldn't blame them. The human they carried out looked like death, and she'd seen enough to know. Leanta was trying to console the girls, but was sensible enough not to make any promises. As the medics carried the alien out, she looked down at the lifeless body, crumpled and forlorn as an empty bag of bagoon puffs, and after a knowing glance to Sergeant Armada, she pointed to the darkening azure puddle spreading from the deceased. You settle it, Armada. Does that puddle look more like a Turox or a rock attack? I don't know, Captain, but it's not a pretty picture. It could be, if you use the right lens filter, muttered the girl they'd taken the omnipad off of. Veldy took a deep breath. It was time to take control, and hopefully get the objective back under cover. Gentlemen and ladies, I regret to tell you that under the Imperial Powers Act, you now fall under the control of General Order 24, and you will... One of the girls stepped forward and set her hands on her hips. No. Fuck, it's her. Young lady, I know you want to... Did you hear me? You know damn well who I am, so don't even try to matronize me. she growled. I'm Princess Kalira Tassu, and while my mother is off planet, you work for me. These people will not be interned under Order 24. And you will get my friend Desi on that shuttle, and then you people will clean this up and disappear. Ah. And I know you're on comms with someone higher up. You tell them I'll be talking with them, and I mean soon. Am I clear? Well, so much for that plan. Veldy stood to attention and saluted. Yes, Your Highness. One of the twins began uncertainly. The pair were shielding a boy just behind them, and her sister said, What? Can I go with him? The girl who'd been cradling the human looked to the princess. Are you sure? Desi, you told me to be a princess and hide, so this had meaning? Well, now I'm a princess in motion. Get on the shuttle. Someone needs to be with him. Captain Veldy almost sighed in relief. The girl scrambling for the exit was covered in blood from head to toe. Getting her out by the shuttle would be a lot easier than keeping her hidden from a campus full of civilians. Lynn, you need to get to the orchestra, while Mara takes care of Aku. Belder, just get Liam to the show. Nesfa, help R'lar. It's going to be all right now, and I promise we'll talk later. Scifi, you need to change for the show. Lark, please get Vadim to his seat for me. The prince was taking to this like a natural, before sputtering and stamping a foot. And fuck! I have to go sing. How can you act like you don't care, Your Highness? Nesfa growled rebelliously. As they trudged towards the amphitheatre, R'lar was calmer now, but his nerves were frayed, and Nesfa was giving everything she had to take care of him. Of course I care. Do you think that was easy? You don't want to be carted off under Order 24. So it's Melondi, all right? You're all under the Imperial Secrets Act now, so it's just Melondi. Vadim reached up and held her hand. After a moment, he giggled. So, second date? Melondi nearly tripped. You really mean that? Really? This wasn't exactly what I had in mind, but if you're willing to, I mean, you cook for me. That has to count, right? Vadim blushed a bit and nodded before cracking up laughing. What is it? Vadim grinned up at her shyly. Dad said if the date goes well, he wants to meet your mother. She couldn't help herself. In spite of everything, she burst out laughing. Jaxme is going to be pissed about those dress pictures, Scifi snorted. What she has on is just ruined. I mean... The laughter of a moment before stole away from the girl's face, and she looked at her hands awkwardly. Even with the blood washed off, Mel thought she was still seeing it there. I'll make it up to them, she said wearily. Fuck! Lark finally bit out, as she walked on the other side of Vadim. It was the first thing she said since leaving the library. What? What? Lark threw her hands in the air, but she kept herself from shouting. Just as she glared up at Melondi. Those bitches took my omnipad. I can't believe it. You're a princess. In a formal gown. With a human. In a shootout. With an admiral. And I can't use any of this. It wasn't a shootout, Melondi muttered after a moment. It was a sword fight. How can you think that isn't better? You can use all of it except for who I am. But the devs' heads... Just keep my secret, Lark, she bit out. Use all the rest. We just have to hope the professor will make it through and keep this a secret, or it's going to get awkward for everybody. The only thing that matters now is that this won't be how his story ends. You have my word on it. The usual throng of parents were moving about the pavilion before the show. Spotting a familiar face, Ganya excused herself from her family and moved over to join Hope Klassen. It's a pleasure to see you again, Administrator. I hope you're enjoying the afternoon. The human woman had been scanning the commons. She started, then looked back and smiled. It's been very nice, thank you. And please, call me Hope. All right, so long as you call me Ganya. Ganya smiled. I'm sorry if I startled you. Is everything all right? Oh, fine, really. I'm just watching for my brother. He went off with his girlfriend and some of her class. She grimaced a bit. I suppose it's all the years I've been away and then been a teacher. I think I've been fretting over him ever since he got here, like one of my students on a field trip. Ah, I know that feeling. Ganya arched her eyebrows and smiled sympathetically. My Kobli Pabrin and my husband always tease me about the same thing. Once our daughters started getting older. In a way, they feel like they're all yours, though. I'd like to think so, Hope said pensively. When I came here as a student, I never imagined making a life here. Now Liam is here, I'm realizing how much I missed. Mever tells me that he's been out and about with young Miss Sosona. She thinks very highly of the girl. Ganya joined the women in gazing out over the commons, looking for Belder. I'm sure he's in very safe hands. The Sosonas are a fine family. Belder is the third of them to come here from Willist. She's been very nice. Hope's frown deepened. I wasn't sure where things were going between them, but I have to admit, she's done everything she can to treat me like a matriarch. Her lips twisted into a dry little smile. I think it just made me feel old. Something else we have in common. I think I was still scaring my oldest daughter's boyfriend to death until almost a year after they'd married. Ganya smiled in reflection. Do you know, I think I'm something of a culturalist. I don't understand. Well, I'm given to understand your academy teaches students of both sexes and all races. It's not something allowed here due to our academy's charter. It was the Empress's will, and I think that we've accomplished great things. Still, there are times when I wish that we had a broader base of students. We've taught the occasional noble from some of the other races, but they're the exception to the rule, Ganya mused. Over the years, I suspect he's placed some blinders on my way of thinking. When Mever invited Professor Warwick to join our staff, even knowing Miv as well as I do, I must admit I had some reservations. Becoming acquainted with him, watching his work, hearing about your brother and Miss Osona from Miv, I do believe that given time, everything can work out for the best. Hope canted her head slowly in thought. How does that make you a culturalist? You see that gentleman over there, with his arm around one of my physics professors? That's Jama Hameres. He's a cultural archaeologist and one of my oldest friends. Ganya nodded over towards Jama, who was looking entirely too comfortable with himself. He winked back at her, and Ganya gave him an indulgent smile. Jama has a belief that as long as two races can find some sort of bridge between them to build on, they can come to understand one another. That sounds like a nice theory. He works with dead races. I've always suspected it's more difficult in practice, but Jama's something of a hopeless romantic when he isn't being a curmudgeon. Still, we've seen it with your brother and my young lady. Ganya shook her head, as Jama slipped away into the crowd with his prize. You see that young woman hovering around Mever, looking like she struck platinum? That's Jaxmi Chogsa. She's quite enamored with Earth and humanity. She's the mind behind these scarves that have been such a hit with the families, and she's largely the reason why Mever has been surrounded by packs of women for most of the afternoon. So that is a real kimono. Hope's gaze wandered over towards Mever. I wondered. I didn't know that's what you called it, but I probably should step in to get her free, Ganya chuckled, as Mever gracefully tried to slip away from a group of 5 women, only to be pulled back in when several more joined her. She nearly made it that time. She's been looking out for her young man as well. Professor Warwick? Oh, very well spotted. Ganya smiled approvingly. They tried to hide it at first, but I think a little Preltha whispered in my ear she's going to propose. I probably should go rescue her, if you'd care to join me. Ganya looked back at the woman at her side. Hope was staring off into the distance, and Ganya followed her gaze. Out over the commons, a shuttle, in the bright sea green of the medical service, was circling in over the campus. She was about to comment on the oddity, when her on-the-pad chimed. Looking at the caller ID, she thumbed it open. Yes, Professor Davari? Yes, She joined Hope in watching the shuttle drop lower, as Davari's voice spoke in her ear. Wait, what kind of incident? Hope felt like she was falling, the yawning pit in her stomach dropping her into a dark sea. The old familiar fear enveloped her, and she could hardly breathe for a long moment, drowning in it. Distantly, she could hear Administrator Cesano speaking, and she clung to the voice like a lifeline. Calm down, she thought. Breathe. There's probably a few thousand people here. Any one of them could require medical assistance. Most of them are less healthy than Liam. Boy's got the constitution of a Taurox. Her lips twitched in the ghost of a mirthless smile. I've definitely been on Shield too long. Ox. He has the constitution of an ox. Carefully, she slipped her feet out of her shoes and kicked them up into her hands without stooping too much. It probably wasn't about Liam, she kept telling herself. But if she had to run, she wasn't going to do it in heels. Thankfully, the Shulvanti equivalent of pantyhose weren't the slippery death traps of old Earth, and the soles had actual grip, if no cushioning. The silly digressions of her stream of thought worked to keep her rooted in the now, rather than sliding once more into her anxiety. Her hand was rock steady as she lifted her arm, a few light touches on her bracelet, banishing the flaring iridescent display and bringing up Liam's contact. Quick touches sent a message. 911, where are you? The device sent in English, even as she stood on her toes to vainly try to see him through the crowd. If she was lucky, she'd be able to see that silly hat he'd insisted on wearing, but now would give anything to spot. Instead, she saw Belder first. The pallor on the girl's face made Hope's stomach drop again, and she started cutting through the crowd, using her comparatively short 5'11" frame to squeeze through spaces that a shill woman couldn't possibly fit. Liam! She blurted out sharply, as she came up in front of the pair like a spectre from the deep. Her tone was sharp, but relief flooded her eyes as she saw him. He looked better off than Belder, but sad. His eyes flipped from Belder to Hope, just in time for his sister to drop her shoes and grab his face. Where were you? What happened? She demanded breathlessly, blue eyes wide with worry. Liam opened his mouth to speak, saying, Hope, it's okay, don't be mad. This isn't Belder's fault. While simultaneously, a hand landed on her shoulder. Don't be mad at Liam, he's okay. I'm so sorry, this wasn't... Belder started saying, her hand falling off Hope's shoulder as the shorter human took a step back from the young man. Hope stepped between them both for a silent moment, before focusing on Liam. Her smile was sad but warm as she leaned her head in, forehead touching his for a wordless moment. Then her hands dropped from his face. Belder shrank slightly under the pale blue gaze, certain this was the end. Willful or not, she'd led Liam into a dangerous situation. His matriarch would never... Thank you, Hope said, startling Belder even more as she wrapped the taller girl in a fierce hug. Aku felt like shaking his head. After all the stories about human men that had been thrilling women across the Imperium, Liam looked utterly unsure of what to do, as Belder and Hope hugged each other and talked about him. Possibly it was just his new friend's youth. Humans might have the stamina of a Taurox, but Liam was clearly smitten with the girl, and seemed uncertain how to handle his matriarch. Still, it looked like all was well and would end well. The situation only called for being left alone, so the two women had the illusion of handling it themselves. If you want my advice right now, Aku whispered, take the win, Daphne. Sergeant Paris checked the corridor one more time before pulling out her omnipad. The last sweep of the building was nearly complete, and for the moment she was alone. As long as her hack held, video surveillance would still be looping for another minute. Plenty of time. The text was brief. TEC3. Orena dead. The omnipad was back in her pocket before anyone was the wiser. Cordera sat back in her chair. Her smile was serene as she reread the text message, carefully relayed and scrambled through interior servers, which had appeared on her omnipad. A82, TEC3, Orena dead. Well then, target eliminated, 3 casualties, and Sergeant Orena was dead. As an agent of the interior, Camordri had never been the sharpest knife in the drawer, but Cordera had taken pains to shepherd her career along carefully. After all, it paid to keep the long goals in mind. After retirement, and again at Cordera's suggestion, Princess Camordri had taken a special interest in family security. At the time, it had made planting agents in the family support team troublesome, but not impossible. Now Agent 82, that would be Paris, was reporting in. Orena's death was vexing. She managed to get 2 women on Kalira's detail, as the youngest princess had the least standing. None at all on Loral, though that was understandable. Now 82 had been exposed. Agent Avari was methodical, a by-the-book personality right down to her bones. General Order 24 was almost certainly being put into effect, clamping the tightest security possible on the whole affair. Paris would be rotated out, along with anyone else on the ground pods who might have been seen. Still, Admiral Arali Tejo was dead. The opportunity to slip new assets onto the Academy wasn't worth the scrutiny, and Orena was dead. Both agents were gone over that pompous fall. After all the effort to make sure they were in place to finish off Tejo, it was positively irksome. But Tejo was dead. She smiled wickedly. The game was on, and she'd won another round. Her patience had paid off. Sooner or later, if you kept the long view, cultivated your assets, and applied force to the right pressure point, everything did. And some people were just worth that extra time and effort. Arali Tejo had been as venal, mendacious, and obnoxious as anyone Cordera had removed from life. Goddess! The woman even published a book advertising the fact. The chance to expunge her had been too tempting to pass up. Now the deed was done, and a feeling of deep satisfaction settled over her. Delicious. The best reward was knowing she could sleep well tonight, warm and comfortable in her bed. Her omnipad would be wiped clean, as it was every day. She looked at the text a third time, committing it to her palace of memories. It hung there in the mental gallery she kept for special triumphs. Mission accomplished. Tejo's shortcomings were her own undoing. Of course, that just leaves the vexing problem of Camordri's order to eliminate Kalira. But what you don't do today, you can tend to tomorrow. I've stretched forth my hand, channeled my will, and today, the Empire truly is a better place, she whispered.